Hello and welcome back to the second episode of the Purple Worm podcast, where we're talking about weird games. So, without further ado, on with the discussion. And we start off continuing our discussion about the implied setting of the Lamentations of the Flame Princess. Also, I do like the fact that it's a slightly later sort of implied time setting than many sort of fantasy RPGs. So there's like rules for black powder weapons and stuff like that.
Oh, okay.
In the back.
Yeah, I like my black powder.
Yeah, and I mean it is an appendix, and it does say they're optional, but it's in the core book. Whereas a lot of games, you have to buy an extra book to like get that sort of stuff. You have to house rule it yourself.
The only downside with Lamentations is that the referee books hasn't come out yet. And I've got the old referee book, and there's some great advice in there.
Pretty much, you never really need any of these referee books to run any of these games, do you? Because the rules are always traditionally, if you're following the kind of D&D groundwork.
No, I mean, all you need is you need it. As long as you've got Sword and Wizardry or Labyrinth Lord Monsters, you can run it. But it's just for new players, they wouldn't know where to start, probably, would they?
Yeah, I mean, to use an analogy, I mean, it's like the reason I like sort of DMing advice, even though like I've been DMing for like ages, is it's the same reason as why I like doing like group podcasts like we're doing now. Is like I could have wrote down exactly the same notes we've got here, and I could have sat on my own and done a podcast. It would have been nothing like what we're getting now by like chatting between ourselves and bouncing ideas off each other. So I like sort of seeing like, oh, this is how this guy did it, and quite often when I'm looking at those advice, it's why I like it when there's a fairly strong sort of authorial voice in like a GMing chapter, because I might go, oh, I'm not going to use that, but there'll always be a few like little bits and pieces where I go, oh, that's a good idea. I'd have never thought of that.
They're like the icing on the cake. They're not the nuts and bolts of.
Yeah. I mean, they're entirely optional stuff. I mean, as you say, I mean, I've run Lamentations loads of time, and like I say, the current version of the refs book, if it ever comes out, isn't out yet. So you don't need it, but in a way, I'm sort of falling back on stuff I've read in a lot of other DM guides. Do I use all the stuff in them? No, of course not. But every now and again, like in the back of my brain, like something will fire off, and it'll be some random thing I've read, and I'll be like, oh yeah, I could do that. But it's all extra ingredients to throw into the sort of melting pot to generate ideas.
Over time, you accumulate so much of this stuff that now I must admit my taste is I get sick of reading essays. Give me the rules. We've had this discussion about ICRPG recently, and a lot of it is not rules. It's essays about good gaming, and there are gems in there. But I don't want to wade through all the stuff I've heard before, or sometimes the stuff which is a bit cryptic because everyone's got their own style. So I've got limited tolerance for it now.
Yeah, I mean, I've had a similar experience with like game fiction. It's like, I mean, back in the 90s when like Vampire the Masquerade was all like the trendy thing, and I was like in my teens, I was like well into all like the World of Darkness stuff, and that's all like dripping with like gothic fiction, sort of meta plot and stuff like that. And I remember like really loving all that when it came out. And to be honest, when I get a book now and it's got loads of like story stuff in, I'm just like, skip, let me get to the actual game.
Just give me a little evocative paragraph at the start of the section, or sprinkled into a little call out, or what do you call it, like a side.
That's it. Maybe like a few sentences just to set the scene.
For a picture, for a bit of atmosphere. That's all.
But I'm like, if I want to read a fiction book, I can go and read fiction books written by people who are good at writing fiction.
I'm with you. Yeah, skip all that.
Yeah,
or put out a fiction book that goes with your game.
Yeah,
put out a novel with your game. More.
I'm pretty much the same with. Like I say, more so now. It's getting the same way with art though as well. Because don't get me wrong, I love a nice picture or a piece of evocative art in a book. However, I'm mainly buying the book for the words, and I like a bit of artwork to support the words. But if the artwork's overtaking that, or it becomes more about the artwork, then I'm like, this wasn't advertised as an art book, because if it was, I'd have probably just moved along and bought an RPG.
I'll tell you what I would buy. If I had a nice setting that I enjoyed and I wanted to run, give me a spiral bound, full bleed, full colour art book where I can just flick it over and hold it up.
Yeah, and I would be quite happy with that, because then you can make an informed decision as a purchaser. If I want some nice pictures, I can buy it and I know what I'm getting. Whereas if I go, right, I'm going to buy an RPG book that's going to have a system in it, and I get like 2 pages of system and like 20 pages of art, I'm like, this probably would have cost me an awful lot less if I didn't have like 18 of those pages of art in it.
Yeah, so I'm mixed on this, because a lot of those early memories of flicking through the RPG books, there's that evocative art that stays with you for. Like, I remember, I've never found Shadowrun a very successful game for me, but I remember when I first saw a sort of street samurai there with the the knuckle blades coming out, and I just thought that is the coolest thing in the world, and I've not forgotten that. But I do have an issue with the kind of, you can't put something out unless it's got top-notch art kind of rhetoric, because I think that is a little bit, problematic in the new kind of DIY homebrew kind of space that we're in. There does seem to be that thing that, if you're not going to shell out some money to get yourself some good art, don't bother putting stuff out, and that makes me, that bugs me a bit.
I mean, the way I've always looked at it is, it's like if you've got a well-written and exciting to read like RPG that does some interesting stuff, it's like, don't get me wrong, having some like judicious, nice artwork will enhance my enjoyment of it slightly. However, if it doesn't have art, it's not going to ruin my enjoyment of it. Whereas if all you've got's a load of nice artwork and the system's rubbish, the artwork's not really going to save the book for me, to be honest.
On the subject of weirdness in RPGs, a lot of that has got to be directly relatable to the art, surely. A lot of the weirdness, or no?
No, I mean, what we were saying is, when we're talking about Lamentations of the Flame Princess, the only real weirdness in the core book is from some of the pieces of the art, which are sort of on that sort of grotesque-y, sort of like body horror sort of end of the spectrum, which I don't have a problem with. I'm fine with that, but it's not everyone's cup of tea.
It's a stretch.
Yeah.
It's a stretch to call your RPG weird on the basis of that, though, and I agree with you. I think that is exactly what makes it a bit weird, because I read it as the free art-free version, and I'm thinking, I don't see how this is weird. Obviously, that summoning spell was a bit unusual.
Yeah, I've got it. I mean, I remember when I first got it and like reading it, and I didn't think, that's weird. But no. When I then looked at some of the supplements, I think that sort of weird fantasy role-playing, it's more like a tagline for the line as a whole, rather than specifically the core book, is how I see it. Maybe that's the weirdest thing about it. The weirdest thing about it is it's not that weird. The scenarios are weird. You've named your whole RPG. You've named your RPG weird, but it's only. It's all gone a bit Inception. We've gone like so weird. We've come out the other side, and we're now ultra normal.
I associate OCR with weird anyway. OCR is weirder than, 5th Ed is not particularly weird, but to me, part of the spirit of the OCR is just having things in dungeons that have got no particular excuse to be there, having things that have come from other dimensions that aren't part of your classic fantasy. So I think if you're playing an OCR game, it will often be characterized by those weird elements, Appendix N stuff, strange dungeon logic.
Yeah, I mean, I do think a lot of people forget that sort of like what we define as like the sort of traditional sort of stereotypical like fantasy sort of tropes and like boundaries weren't really as firmly set sort of when D&D first came out as they are now. So I mean, everyone always talks about the I can't remember what it's called, the one with the crash spaceship, the module.
Yeah, I think that is in Blackmoor. It's in one of the
Barrier Peaks.
Barrier Peaks. That's it. Yeah.
That's where,
there was like a strong thread of like sort of like science fantasy running through the early stuff, and I mean you can see that even now in some of it. It's like if you're looking delving deeper, like in the monster section, the first monster is an android. Yeah. And it's like in traditional fantasy you probably wouldn't find that now, but like back in the day, sure, why not? Anything goes.
In True Classics, you've got a frozen spaceman.
Yeah,
that's awesome. And you had it even in Lankmar. I mean, you'll be walking around Lankmar, and then some guy will turn up who's clearly a traveller from future Earth.
But personally, I don't find it any less convincing. Like if you're in a world where like someone's like, "Oh, I've just seen that elf like pull out a magic wand and like shoot a magic missile out of it and shoot someone," to say like, "Oh, and then this guy in this weird suit came in with this like strange like cylindrical device and he fired a magic bolt out of it and someone fell over." I don't see either of them as being any less weird than the other.
I think this. You mentioned DCC a couple of times now, Dave. I think the root of the weirdness is maybe the Appendix N, because they've gone back to fantasy when it was more like science fantasy, and science fiction and fantasy was much more or less, like you say, less defined, and the tropes had not. You know, a lot of games that have come in more recent times are quite derivative of earlier games, but DCC tried to go back to the source.
Yeah, absolutely. So you've got the sci-fi elements, but you've actually got a healthy dose of mythos, and the alignments aren't as settled. So you've got, anyone doing sorcery is doing something dark and is going to get twisted by it. And again, that's part of the in-joke. I don't want to say in-joke, but it is. It's part of the sort of amusing shared understanding of the campaign, that if you're a sorcerer, it's gonna get twisted for you, and you've given away some part of yourself.
Yeah, but I've got to admit, my only sort of qualm with DCC is due to like the size of the book. It's one of those games where I feel like I'd have to like play it a bit first before I'd be confident running it, because there's like a lot in it. You
just get a quick start and run it off that. Yeah. I would.
You'd have to go to the gym first before you pick the book up anyway.
You would.
That's it. My book's on that shelf up there. I'm wondering to put my back out if I try and get it off the shelf.
Have you played DCC, Pete?
No, I've not. I've seen the book, and just the size of the book puts me off. It's probably...
Hey, listen, mate, I've got a copy of Zweihander next to my copy of DCC and my copy of Astonishing Sword and Swordsman of Hyperborea up there. I'm going to work my head and my pecs while I'm lifting all three of them down.
Yeah, I just got Zweihander. I didn't expect it to be so big. It's quite a nice surprise. But don't forget, DCC, a great chunk of that book is spells.
Yeah.
Because
and
every
tables.
spell has got a two-side description. Then you've got tables, you've got monsters.
Oh, yeah.
The rules aren't so much, actually. Like, everything skill-based is a double-page spread, and even most of that double-page spread is space. But there are some funny, fiddly bits that you do have to play. Everyone I've played with hand waves all the same stuff. I mean, your stats get a beating, and technically, rules as written, you're supposed to adjust your modifiers as your stats go up and down. Nobody does that. I mean, you just chuck that out of the window straight away.
The bit I like from DGC is the funnel at the beginning.
Yeah, that does appeal to me.
Yeah, you're nobody. Let's get you to first level.
The funnel straight in my rules, my own sort of homebrew rules will have a funnel.
Right. Yeah. Right, you could do it with BX.
Yeah.
You could do it with old school.
I don't know why more people don't, because you need them. Otherwise, you keep needing to roll up characters. I'm gonna start. I was thinking about this today. I'm gonna start coming to sessions with 2 or 3 characters done, and then I can role play with want and abandon. And if I want to charge in and get killed, I haven't got to think, I've got to roll up a character. I can just go boom. There's my character. I can have a copy with the GM already, so they can already kind of have them on the subs bench. I don't know why we don't do more of it.
I think for me as well, one of the benefits of funnel is quite often people will talk about, like due to sort of higher like character mortality and like sort of BX and stuff like that. Because obviously, if you're like playing a Maid and you start off with like all the fucking like hit points of like a lace doily or whatever, you take like 1 arrow, that's it, you're brown bread at first level. But so a lot of people are like, is it worth coming up with like extensive backgrounds for characters? And some people say yes, some people say no. But one of the things I like about the whole idea of the funnel in DCC is, let's say you have a scenario where you're like, you're all just playing villagers. You're 0 level villagers, your village is about to get attacked by orcs or whatever, and that's the funnel, you like trying to prepare for this attack. Whichever characters survive that and become first level, they've got a shared piece of background, but it's not just background that they've just come up with and just invented. It's actually something that was played through, so it's more exciting and more evocative.
And I'm sick to death of I'm an orphan background that so many people come up with. Give me something new.
Definitely. I don't know if I actually had this conversation with John or not, but I'm well into getting my family members into stories now and stuff like that, because it's just more interesting and more believable.
That's why your character's family in like the Midlands games, like the cast of EastEnders.
It is. I'm totally deliberate. And the game before that, John, it was like rescue the old man and get him on the wagon, and you played me dad, and we do the whole father and son bit, you know.
It's one of the things I'm enjoying about your character in the Middlelands game, because like we've obviously got like your dad, who's like a sort of Frank Butcher from EastEnders, sort of like wide
and
boy who's like
actually Frank Butcher.
Yeah, he's actually called Frank Butcher, and he's like he's like a butcher, but like he used to like run the criminal. Yeah, he used to like run the criminal gangs, but he's actually a butcher as well. And now he's settled down and gone legit. And then you're like, oh, and I've also got a sister who may or may not be a witch and sometimes sees the future. And I'm like, yeah. and again, that comes back to what I was saying earlier about, I love it when players like throw me stuff that like maybe throws me a bit of a curveball or like surprises me. So I'm like, all right, great. So a couple of things I'd probably not even considered, but there we go.
We did all that in like the Session Zero. It weren't like I planned it out. Yeah. It was all kind of semi-emergent as well. And
that was it. And I mean, I know Session Zeros do sometimes come in for a bit of stick. I mean, I don't, to be honest, I don't agree that you always need like a formal, sort of, yes, this is the Session Zero. It might just be people having a bit of a chat, because I find a lot of these things when people are saying like, oh, you know, you've got to be careful like what you include in games and whatever. A lot of that can be ironed out or sort of smoothed out before any problems even begin. If you just sit down with like your people at the start of the game and you say like, look, this is the sort of game I'm thinking of running. What do you think? Have you got any ideas you can like throw in? There's quite a few things in Session Zero that you guys mentioned that I'd maybe looked at differently or I'd not considered, but I was like, oh yeah, that's a good idea. Yeah, we can do something with that, and it just expands it.
We probably should put a pin in Session Zero, because I think that would be a really good topic to discuss at length. I reckon everybody's probably got some good thoughts around Session Zero. What was you gonna say more on Session Zero, Dave?
Well,
or did you want to get into Tingleverse?
That I only heard of Session Zero when I first started listening to Anchor podcasts. I hadn't heard of that terminology, and I used to go, oh yeah, we turned up for the first session, we spent the whole time making characters. So now I understand we can plan that and we can call it Session Zero.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you, because it was something I only discovered when I started gaming online. Because I'd always sort of been doing like when I was gaming face to face more, I'd always been sort of like, oh, you know, we'll meet up and have a drink or whatever, and we'll like talk about characters and we'll gen them all, and then we're good to go as soon as we get to the first session. But I never sort of understood there was a term for it or anything like that. But when I started getting on, I was like, oh, Session Zero, and I was like, oh, I've been sort of doing that anyway. So, but yeah, I think you're right. That'd be a good topic for a future.
Yeah, we'll put a pin in that, and I know Dave is dying to tell us all about Tingleverse, aren't you, Dave?
No, I have to start then. I have to start.
We've been going. We've just transitioned so smoothly.
That was it. Professional through and through.
We agreed we would bring. I'm going to do this nice and quick. Then we agreed we would bring a weird game each, because that was meant to be our main topic. Was weird RPGs. So
Lamentations of the Flame Princess from John. There, we've done it. We've wangled in a bit of DCC. You're actually third on the agenda, and you don't even realise.
I was going to say mine was Lamentations in the Middlelands, and I've mentioned both of them.
Good point. Oh yes, we've been going through. Nicely done. Nicely done. I didn't even notice I was being managed. So...
Smooth as China silk.
That's it. Silky GM skills there.
Here's the Tingleverse. I don't know why I'm holding it up.
Yeah, that don't work so well in audio. Dave is now holding up the book,
which is a real shame, because you really do want to see the cover. So I've got to admit, I had seen some discussion of this online. I'd seen that it was on Amazon, but I didn't know anything about it because I didn't know who Chuck Tingle was. And you see the cover picture, and it's a weird kind of Photoshop cover picture. And people saying, oh, I'm really excited, the Chuck Tingle game's dropped. And I thought, yeah, that looks odd, I won't pick that up. And I heard the 3T podcast discussing it. And they were impressed that it was actually a half-decent game. And that intrigued me, so I got hold of it. And what can I say about the Tingleverse? That is quick. So if you don't know anything about Chuck Tingle, I am not going to really... I don't know if we found the level of this podcast yet, so I don't really know how much I can tell you about Chuck Tingle. The quick summary of Chuck Tingle's literature: he or they write self-referential, postmodern, comedy, gay, pornographic literature. They are absolutely bizarre. Some of the things that happen in these stories is that characters realise that they are characters in a bit of gay pornographic literature. There's one I was reading as research, of course, for the show, where the character then engages in discussion with the author and says, "What am I in a film?" And the author says, "No, clearly you're in a book because look around you. We're just words." It's that kind of thing. But the Tingleverse, so the Tingleverse role-playing game, it is credited to Chuck Tingle, and if Chuck Tingle exists, he knows his RPGs. This is basically an OSR game. It's got the 6 stats. They've been renamed. It's got your type, which is your race or culture. You can be a Bigfoot or a human or a raptor or a unicorn, of course. It's got your trot, which is your class. You can be a bad boy or a charmer or a sneak or a true buckaroo. And then you've got a whole bunch of other things you can choose. Oh, you can be a wizard as well. You've got an alignment. The alignments, disappointingly, are the very standard fantasy alignments, lawful good all the way to chaotic evil. You've then got unique ways. So you can be notable for your abs or your calves or your sense of existential dread or your glasses, things like this. And it is the game is laid out. It has very poor production values, a really dodgily photoshopped cover, but it's laid out like someone's kind of OSR heartbreaker game. Right, I'm going to tell you about some of the bizarre monsters that are here. So one of the monsters, just to give you a sense, actually the pornographic content is not really there in the book. This is pretty much a family-friendly game, which is surprising if you hunt down to see the stuff he writes. Okay. But there is one particular monster who is my favourite, who is called the Man with No Eyes and Wieners for Hair. But we are told that his habitat is any, his organisation is solo, he travels alone, diet, none, he doesn't need to eat, alignment, lawful evil, encounter level 15, size 7 foot, health points 325, and then his cool moves are his psychic blast and his dangerous awareness. You're going to recognise a lot of this stuff from playing OSR games. I don't know. We are warned, discussing the Man with No Eyes and Wieners for Hair early in the game could have devastating results. He can travel between timelines. The game plays on multiple universe theory, time travel, and I think my short summary is that we would make for a really zany tabletop experience. And if you're put off by the idea of it being a Chuck Tingle game, it's still worth looking at. It's got some random tables in there as well.
I do love a random table.
And how much was that, Dave?
It's paperback. I think it costs about 15 quid, which in this day and age is not even ludicrously overpriced, I don't think.
I'm finding it quite interesting that we're talking about weird and people keep using a different word. Gonzo is a word. I'm sure somebody said gonzo and Dave said something else. And I actually struggle with, when we talking about weird, I struggle with what is weird in an RPG, because I mean the whole hobby's a bit weird, isn't it?
Speak for yourself.
I'm not saying this is the answer, but one of the approaches to weird I really like is the approach in Numenera. Yeah, where their very specific approach to weird is just to say, don't bother yourself explaining why this stuff is here, because the point is nobody understands it. It's so far out of everyone's conception that they're never going to understand it. So the minute you start, so the point of the Numenera, it's totally far in the future, been through all of the future texts you could possibly imagine and a whole bunch that you can't, and now it all just remains in fragments and vestiges. And the point is, any installation or whatever you set up, if you're thinking of it as a spaceship, it's not weird enough. If you put a device there and you're thinking of it doing a particular job, it's not weird enough. Point is, you just bung a device there, it does things, and nobody knows why, and nobody's ever going to know why. And that to me, and that actually, the reason why I liked that, and I sometimes say that Numenera is my way back to the OSR or my way into the OSR, is because that vindicates a lot of dungeon logic. You know, what's it doing there? All of those essays we used to read about dungeon ecosystems, to me, weird just means I can stick stuff in a dungeon and never bother explaining to anybody why it's there.
Yeah, that is quite weird. And just a couple of things that Dave has said about old school games. If you use, say, for example, BX as your baseline for what's weird, it's going to throw out all your other judgments of weird, because I think you've started too high up the weird tree. Because BX, David said it. You know, all that old school stuff is either you're going to call it a bit gonzo or a bit weird. I think you need to sort of think about weirdness in terms of, like, you know, going to work tomorrow and how sort of maybe mundane and normal that is, and then judge your weirdness away from that.
I tell you what, though, I think we found the title for the episode anyway. Too high up the weird tree.
Yeah, I like that.
Oh, that's quality. I'm loving that. But weirdness is one of those things where I've always found.
You can quote me. You can quote me on that one.
I've always found it. I personally, it's just a personal thing, I prefer when it's used sporadically. So, like, if I'm in a game and like everything is like utterly weird, it stops being weird for me, because I'm like, that's just the new normal. It's like I've often had people say to me when they're talking about Numenera, to come back around to that, people have just gone, oh, there's so much going on in the setting, I don't really know where to start. And I said, well, what I do for myself whenever I run it is I sort of narrow the focus on like a very small area of the setting, because then you can say, right, this is the normal bit that's going on, and like you're in a normal little town. Yeah, okay, there's a few bits of weird technology, but it's pretty normal. And then when you go, however, 10 miles out of there, there's a giant amber obelisk that like floats in the middle of the air, everyone will be like, fucking hell, what's going on with that? Whereas if you're like, oh, everyone's flying around in like horseless carriages and there's unicorns, and then you go, oh, there's a giant floating obelisk, everyone's like, well, yeah, of course there is.
So yeah. I'm finding it quite interesting that Johnny is kind of seems to be hinging quite a lot of the weirdness on the setting. Tingleverse, it was, I mean, you said it's pretty much OSR rules, and the weirdness is the weirdest thing about it perhaps is what it comes from, and it's kind of weird that it's an alright game based on the wacky roots of it all.
That's the primary weirdness. It's weird because it is half decent.
So that goes back to the setting quite a bit.
Yeah.
And then Lamentations, that's weird because it says it is, but pretty much none of us think it is.
Correct. Yeah.
But how about this one? Now, Peter's got the Maid RPG. Now, I would suggest that is a game that is going to make you and your players feel a bit weird about playing it.
Yeah, so what is Maid? Well, Maid is a Japanese role-playing game, and it's loosely anime style of game. And the players are all maids in the setting. And the players are all trying to do favors for the games master, who is the master of the maids. The system itself is pretty normal, but what is really weird is how you generate your characters. The characters are all rolled for randomly. It's batshit crazy. That's all I can say. You have your classes, and the classes that you can be is sexy, cool, boyish, heroine, pure, and Lolita. So doesn't sound too bad on the surface of it.
Have they got like a player's handbook too, where there's like a sort of a fat and slightly tired class? If so, I'm calling dibs on that one.
Yeah, but then you roll randomly for your special quality, and some of the special qualities are quite mundane. You have freckles. Yeah, right. That's not really. But then it gets really weird because you can have an addiction to cigarettes. Yeah, that's okay. Alcohol. Yeah, that's all right. But then it goes really off piece that you could be a killer, a pyromaniac, a stalker, a nymphomaniac. So, yeah. How are you going to put an exhibitionist? Does that mean you start flashing yourself at the table?
See, what I'm hearing you say, Pete, is this probably isn't a con game.
It's definitely not a con game, because the hand would be on the X card all the bloody time. But what appealed about it for me is one of the scenarios in there is that you're all maids of a dungeon, and some nasty adventurers are coming in and upsetting your dungeon. So you've got to go around setting up the traps and looking after the demon overlord whose dungeon it is to keep it safe for all the monsters in there. So I thought, well, that's quite a good idea for a game. That just yeah, I don't really want to be a nymphomatic maid wearing a school uniform with blue pigtails. Really,
You
Right,
might.
but- I always
do
like.
I do that in my spare time, really.
It's just like too much like a busman's holiday, isn't it?
see, none of you listening to this podcast can see this, but Pete is actually wearing like a pigtail wig while he's doing this.
You said you wouldn't tell anyone.
Well, I just thought it was worth appreciating how method you've gone with this like podcast episode.
But that interests me because that being based on anime has got a whole load more sort of sexual or sexualized content than Tingleverse. I mean, there just is nothing in Tingleverse, even despite the source material. All right, okay.
See,
That is a bit weird. That is a bit. I feel this is the weirdest so far.
See, I think in a way the whole like you're trying to earn favor with like the games master is like the least weird thing about it, because don't you sort of do that in most RPGs anyway? Because like, and maybe not in such an overt way, but obviously everyone knows if you like play like a really interesting character, you're engaged in a game, you're contributing to it, you're more likely to have the GM be like well disposed towards you and your character. So in a way, aren't you sort of like playing up to the GM in most RPGs anyway?
And we all know what it means if the GM gives you some inspiration. You know what I'm saying? It's like a pat on the head and a dog biscuit, I always think, giving somebody inspiration. Yeah, I'm super not happy with that sucking up to the GM idea from Maid. No, I think they're having a little. Do you think they're having a little subtle dig at RPGs there? A little bit of.
No, it's deadly serious, because in the intro, the bloke that translated it into English has to explain sort of the ethos, the way the Japanese are, and say, look, this isn't weird in Japan. You've got to take it at face value. This is quite normal for Japan.
And to be fair, I mean, I think even if it was a bit of a sort of self-referential sort of bit of humour towards RPGs, I don't think I'd be too bothered about it, because let's face it, there's certain like tropes of like role playing that as role players we all sort of have a bit of a laugh at. So that's it for the second episode of the Purple Worm. Join us next time where we'll be concluding our look at weird games in the RPG industry. Until we see you then, take care, happy gaming, and watch out for those purple worms.